talk about comprehension skills. And once again, with Logic of English, rather than this being a separate subject, it is completely integrated into how we teach all of English. So comprehension is kind of that epitome of reading. We think about all of those books that children get to read and all those texts, and that they can understand them and integrate that knowledge. And I want to remind us of this view, of the simple view of reading, that decoding skills are really, really key to comprehension skills. Also, oral language is really key to comprehension skills. So children being read to, talking to them, all that they're listening to, also plays a big role in their reading comprehension. And I think it's important to understand that when we ask students to read and comprehend, and they don't have good decoding skills, oftentimes they internalize that there's something wrong with them because they think, oh, everybody else just gets it. And I think that it's really important that we understand that those foundational skills are essential to reading comprehension. It's also good to know that the brain uses the same regions for listening comprehension as for reading comprehension. We talked about this in the neuroscience of reading, that reading is connecting to the areas of sound and meaning that we use for speaking and listening. And the very first part of developing good comprehensive skills is reading aloud to kids, because books, even children's books, have a lot more vocabulary in them. They have more complex sentence structures than we use in daily speech. So reading aloud to children is really important, and reading aloud to your classrooms, introducing them to texts beyond what they can read themselves by having them listen, is actually a really great way to build their comprehension skills. And we can do this in the classroom with many ages of children. If you have struggling readers, it's an interesting thought, right, to think we could be reading aloud or listening by audiobooks to texts at their grade level, reading and discussing them while working on foundational skills, and at some point this is going to merge. So the importance here of oral comprehension to developing reading comprehension. And when when students have then mastered the foundational skills of reading, they'll be able to read and comprehend at that same level they can listen and comprehend. I just think this is super important. And I think it helps us to understand how these foundational skills fit together better. That these comprehension skills are very, very important as a foundational skill, but they're related to the others. Comprehension skills are strategies a reader may employ to better comprehend a text. And we can practice those as well by listening, as we've already said. Now, there's many things to think about when we're choosing text for students. What helps us determine the difficulty of that text? Because you don't want to give an emerging reader, Shakespeare. I mean, it's really important that we match the text. Or help to understand textual difficulties. The length of the text and the length of the words or phrases or sentences in that text really determines part of its difficulty. Also, a very short book with just a few words is obviously going to be easier to read than a very thick, long book. Language complexity is a really big piece of textual difficulty as well. The vocabulary in those books, the sentence structures. You experienced this, right, when we were in the fluency section. Vocabulary and sentence structure play a big role in how difficult a text is. Background knowledge is key. We talked about this as well, that a student who doesn't have background knowledge about a subject may struggle to comprehend it more, even though everything else about the book is at a very similar level of difficulty. So I think I referenced that in Foundations D, there's this text about baleen whales, and some students find that one difficult, others do not, but it's based on their background knowledge oftentimes. Another thing about texts, I think that's related to difficulty is, are they interesting? If you're handing students books to read that are boring or that are repetitive or that don't grab their attention, that actually makes it harder to read. And we've all experienced this, right? You have to read this paper or whatever it is, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can hardly get through it because I'm not personally engaged in it. So it's really important that the texts that we give students are engaging, and that we're not just giving them paragraph after paragraph or, little something that's been designed just for reading instruction. Because oftentimes texts designed just for reading instruction are not very interesting. So making sure that those have been developed with a lot of engagement and interest. It's also, I think, really important to think about the fact that it's not a question of either or. Kids need to be exposed to great books and rich literature, and they need to know the sound symbol relationships of the language. I think we need to move out of this idea that it's either we read great books or we teach the foundational skills. So I like to look at comprehension skills from as it applies to Bloom's taxonomy of learning. And a lot of our skills, as you'll see them in the curriculum, relate to this as well. So there's the level of knowledge, which exhibits memory of previously learned material by recalling fundamental facts, terms, basic concepts, and answers about the selection. Just recalling knowledge and facts, reading it, asking some factual questions. And these are some of the sub-skills of this knowledge level. Can you create a list of some of the things that happened? Can you recall facts? Can you take the events in the book and put them in a sequence or match the concepts? The next level is comprehending, which is demonstrating an understanding of the facts and ideas by organizing them or comparing and translating, by interpreting, giving descriptions, or stating the main idea. So this requires a little bit higher order level of thinking. So making predictions, it's a great one when you're reading, asking, or when you're listening to a book, what do you think is going to happen next? Why do you think the author titled it this? Why is this illustration on this page? Making these predictions, drawing a picture, finding the main idea in a text is really important. So what is the main idea of this article or this paragraph or this story? How are characters feeling? That's a big one too. Then we have apply, which is solving problems in new situations by applying this knowledge and the facts and rules in a new or different way. So now you're taking the information you're learning from a text and you're applying it to solve a problem or do something else. So you can act it out. You can have a literal problem that you have to find the solution to, following directions, or drawing connections to your life. Another great thing to ask students when you're reading, especially fiction, is, do you relate to this character? Have you ever had this experience? And helping them to apply that text to themselves. You can also examine and break information into parts by identifying the motives or causes, making inferences, and finding evidence to support generalizations. Identifying keywords is in this analyzing. Keywords are a really great comprehension activity. So as you're reading, you can ask them to highlight, say, 3 keywords in each sentence. Or if you don't want them to highlight in the text, to write down those 3 keywords in each sentence, you can then put away the book or the text and use the keywords to say, can you tell me back what this text is about using these keywords? This is the beginning, right, of writing an outline. This is a very simple and easy way to begin great note-taking skills. It also helps find main idea. And it's a great way to bridge from reading to composition, to summarizing a text. I love using keywords. Asking students to compare and contrast 2 texts. We do a lot of this in foundations where they read 2 texts and then they compare and contrast them. Writing an outline is an expansion of kind of a keyword idea. Identifying humor in a text. I think one of the things I love actually about Foundations D is that it asks students to understand some of these children literature books, and then it gives them, by giving them also nonfiction paired with it. And so then sometimes the nonfiction teaches them something about this fiction book, and then all of a sudden this hidden humor comes out. I remember, I think one of the ones I love is where they read about carp. There's a nonfiction reader all about carp, and that's interesting because there's all of these invasive species, so it gets into some science and things. But then they read fish out of water, and here, the salesman is Mr. Carp, and actually a goldfish is a kind of carp. And so there's all this little bit of humor and play on words, and a lot of that just goes right past us, but it's great to make all these connections and analyze and find the humor and point it out. Another level of Bloom's taxonomy is compiling information together in a different way by combining elements in a new pattern or proposing alternative solutions. Some of the sub-skills of that would be rewriting, solving a problem, writing a paper off of this, or inventing something, or designing something. I know when they read Miles and Jackson, there's this story about this tree house. They go off and they design a tree house. And so being able to use that information, I think in Foundation C, there's an activity where they're reading about Halong Bay, and they go and they create then a travel brochure about Halong Bay. So you're taking what you're learning and you're comprehending, and now you're creating something new and designing something new with that information. And then finally, there's evaluate, which is present and defend opinions by making judgments about information. Are the ideas valid? What about the quality of work? And students can begin this very easily. Did you like this book? Form an opinion about it. Evaluate it. Did you like this one? With evaluating, it's about forming an opinion. It can also be about comparing and contrasting. It's really important as students get older to teach about fact-checking and validity of sources. And the idea that there can be all sorts of sources that are saying something, but does that mean that they're true? So very important to teach them how to distinguish the validity of sources and evaluate that, and to critique those sources. So all sorts of ways that we can build from in our comprehension skills and ask more and more challenging questions, and also begin to use that knowledge together. Here's what one teacher has to say.
Those level readers, I love them in the back of our logic books because it went from really easy to kind of gradually growing with them. And so when I say pick up one of your readers from Logic of English, they'll get anyone. Because, we practice so much and they can read and they love to read it. It's, okay, I want to take this one, I'll read this one. And then all the words in there, if they don't know the words, they'll go right to singing them or doing the sounds to get to figure out the unknown word or the word they're struggling with.
So she talks about the fact that there are no words that they don't know in the readers. So one of the things about Logic of English is all of those readers have been controlled for phonograms and rules. So if they have not been explicitly taught a concept and know how to read a word, those words don't show up. And if there is one of those 2% exception words, those have already been pre-taught through spelling analysis. Also, many of your spelling analysis lists are actually front-loading words that are showing up in readers in the next couple lessons, because then if they have taught it this way, right, they are then able to read that word probably more fluently when they encounter it. That's actually where all of the spelling lists come for Foundations D. They're all front-loading the most difficult words through spelling analysis so that when they encounter them in books, they're ready to go. The readers also are increasing in difficulty. So in Foundations A, the readers are very, very simple. They are 1 and 2, 3 word phrases, and they have to then match the picture to those phrases. And that's also very intentional because we don't want students reading them and guessing. We want them instead to figure it out and create this book for themselves. So many young children are already kind of familiar with I read the pictures that we wanted to take the pictures away and give them just text, and then they can find the pictures and put them in. And then in Foundations B, they increase in complexity. They begin to read sentences. They've been introduced to what an uppercase letter is and the concept of what a sentence is. And so they increase in complexity. By Foundation C, they have nonfiction texts about all sorts of different subjects, from things like trains to what kids around the world are doing, different activities of children around the world, to Halong Bay. rickshaws. And then they also have this new series, Miles and Jax, which is, I think, really fun. If you haven't seen it, please check it out. But it is a early chapter book, completely phonetically controlled, and yet to me it reads like a really great children's literature story. But it's important, right, that these are engaging for students. And then by Foundations D, they're reading children's literature books and combining those with nonfiction readers that help open up even the children's literature further. With Essentials, then, they also began with the Essentials reader completely controlled. And so you'll have a chance to be looking at that in your small group. And they increase in complexity. There's never a phonogram or spelling rule that they haven't learned. One of the things to be watching for in your next small group, if you're doing Essentials, is that in the reader there's always a list at the beginning of the most challenging words. That is a great way to practice those words up front. If you have a really struggling student, you could even teach every one of those words through spelling analysis before they go to read the text, because that will help them have confidence. And if they can read those words more fluently and are, it's not the first time they're encountering them, they'll have greater success and they'll be able to focus on comprehension.